Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel on Fulfilling the Promise of Opportunity Zones, moderated by Managing Director of the Institute's Center for Financial Markets, Aron Betru.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for what I hope to be probably the most important discussion we're going to have here for the next couple of days at the Milken Institute. You're joining us for Fulfilling a Promise of Opportunity Zones. And I think no better way than to illustrate why this is so important, if not to share a couple of statistics. 52 million, less than a quarter, 75 and 50%. 52 million Americans that live in distressed communities across this nation. Less than a quarter, because between 2010 and 2016, we had 75% of the net job growth that occurred in this nation came from a few metropolitan cities on the coast, while less than a quarter happened for the rest of this nation. 75 and 50%. That's the median household wealth that declined in African American and Hispanic communities over the last 30 years. This is essentially the backdrop where two individuals, Kevin Hassett, Jared Bernstein, authored an interesting white paper. This white paper focused on how to use capital gains tax incentives to mobilize capital into underserved communities, opportunity zones. On the stage, we have a number of experts that are going to share their perspective on what was the initial intent and where we're at now. I should begin by saying, unfortunately, Secretary Mnuchin, that was supposed to also join us, I know he's in the program, but unfortunately he was called away to be part of the trade delegation that's in China. So I'm sure he would rather be here, but nonetheless, he was able to send in his stead the General Counsel from Treasury, Brent McIntosh, who's sitting to my left. And to his left, we have Richard Ressler, co-founder and principal of CIM Group. To my right, the Honorable Governor from the great state of Mississippi, Phil Bryant. And to his right, Emmanuel J. Friedman, co-founder and CEO of EJF Capital. I'm going to start on the federal side. At the end of December 2017, Tax Cut and Jobs Act, we had a bipartisan piece of legislation that was sponsored by Senator Scott in South Carolina, Senator Booker in New Jersey, the Invest in Opportunity Act. A number of the initiatives from there were lifted and put into the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, opportunity zones. Brent, it would be great to hear from you on the administration side. What were some of the original perspectives, and where are we at now on implementation?
Yeah, that's, first of all, I do have to apologize on behalf of my boss. He's on his way to China for the trade negotiations. He's sorry he couldn't be here. And I will try to substitute ably for him.
If you squint, he looks like him.
So, stepping back a bit, if you look at where the American economy is right now, the economy is doing very well. It's booming. If you look at unemployment is at historically low levels. If you look at Q1 GDP, a remarkable 3.2% annualized. And yet there are clearly communities that are left behind and that are struggling and that are not sharing equally in this sort of economic growth. And so one thing the administration is very interested in is how to revitalize those communities. And so one of the key programs, and one about which we are immensely excited, is the Opportunity Zones program, where you look at this piece of legislation with bipartisan support, and it has, I think people largely know the contours, but this is a way of taking a lot of unrealized capital gains, trillions of dollars of unrealized capital gains, and creating tax incentives to invest that in our poorest communities. And not just willy-nilly in those communities, but in a way that is in consultation with state and local authorities and with the communities themselves, so that this is not a one-size-fits-all program, top-down program. This is a program where the governors of states, in consultation with the local communities, designate specific census tracts that then qualify as opportunity zones. And they have to meet certain statutory criteria. All 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the territories have all designated opportunity zones. Something like 8,700 census tracts have been designated. And if you look at the contours of those tracts, we're talking about places where median family income is 37% lower than the surrounding states, where poverty is nearly double the rates in the surrounding census tracts, where unemployment is 60% higher than in comparable areas. And so we think this has the potential to really bring in an enormous amount of investment into these areas to be used in any number of ways that can be immensely important for these areas. The Secretary has estimated that he thinks this will bring in $100 billion or more of investment into these areas. And that's a really, really remarkable thing. For us, the tax reform bill passes in December of 2017, and although it's a massive bill, the number of pages devoted to the Opportunity Zones program is quite small. And so we knew immediately that we needed to put meat on those bones, because to really allow businesses to rely on this program and investors to put in money into these zones and communities to understand what the sort of investments that would qualify were, we knew that we needed to fill out the nuances and listen to investors and communities and state governments to understand how this program would work and how we could marry the statutory text with the actual investments that were going to be done. And so we spent a great deal of time putting together a first set of regulations, which came out last year, that really will guide investment. And then we listened to a lot of questions. We did a huge number of meetings with states, with communities, and with investors to understand what the tricks and nuances and problems and the hard questions we needed to answer were. And then this past week, we put out a second set of regulations that attempt to answer all those questions to the extent we can. Inevitably, there are going to be more questions, but we are so excited about this program and really feel a great enthusiasm for getting out these sets of guidance that will allow people to understand questions about things like, how does working capital count, and how do we do, what are the set of businesses that will qualify, and how do the investments work in terms of time to deploy the investments. And so there's a lot of technical nuance in those regulations, all of which is based on questions we got and trying to make it as flexible as we can within the bounds of the statute. And we're seeing already great enthusiasm. But at this point, really the role of the federal government is to answer the questions we have and then to step back and get out of the way so that people like the governor and other state governments and the communities where this capital can be invested can do their part and really drive this in a grassroots way so that this is not just a federal top-down, one-size-fits-all program.
Thank you for that, Brett. He invoked you, so I'm going
He
to have
did.
to go to you.
Absolutely.
So this is now a handoff from the federal government to state and local governments to kind of ensure implementation. Love to hear what's happening in
That
Mississippi.
corporate federalism. So when we heard about this in Mississippi, we thought, well, they designed this just for us. Well, of course they did, because, in Mississippi, our economy's growing. We've got the lowest unemployment in Mississippi's history. The jobs that are available in Mississippi now that are paying more than ever before, our graduation rate's higher than it's ever been. What we don't have is capital. So we looked at this immediately. I went to the Treasury. That was about the 12th of February because I was trying to get home for Valentine's Day. I thought I won't get in that much trouble over this. But we go there, and the Treasury says, we're not sure. We're not exactly sure how this is going to work. And I said, I tell you how it's going to work. Mississippi's going to do the first deal. I'm going to go to Vicksburg, Mississippi. I got Vicksburg Forest Company, Forest Product Company, and I've got an investor who just sold some real estate, and he's got a capital gains, and he wants to invest it in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and I want him to. So we were kind of on that maybe forgiveness rather than permission trip right now. So we go to Forest, Mississippi, where 125 people had lost their jobs. In Vicksburg, Mississippi, 125 people had lost their jobs. Now, in West Vicksburg, Mississippi, that's a distressed area. The investor came in, and he said, I think I can make this work. I'm going to put my money into it. I'm going to put my capital gains recovery into this. I'm going to put also my partner's money into it. What will the state of Mississippi do? And we said, look, we're going to put $400,000 into infrastructure. We're going to repair your roads. We're going to get it where you can get electricity to that sawmill. That Vicksburg is going to put in $100,000. So we started stacking things. That lasagna analogy that was given this morning was really good. So we're making this lasagna over there in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And sure enough, it worked. 125 families are living and working there in Vicksburg, Mississippi, but they're not living in the type of quality home that they should. So we started looking at at how we could go in there and build these homes. So how we could use LIHTC credits, those low-income home tax credits, how we could do that to put workforce housing in there. And what we did on the application, we said, okay, developers, if you'll build within an opportunity zone, oh, by the way, I wish it would be Vicksburg, Mississippi, but if you build within that opportunity zone, we're going to give you 5 extra points in your application for tax credit. You know what developers will do for 5 extra points? Oh, yeah, they'll climb over hills and valleys and get to you for 5 extra points. So now we're going to have housing in there. Not just apartments, and I'm not mad at apartments, but we like duplexes and triplexes that have sidewalks and lights and a community center so that the children can go in and play in the afternoons when they come home from school. They can ride their bike in their neighborhood. This is going to be remarkable change, and we believe this is exactly what the bill was designed to do. Go into a distressed area. Now, I've got 100 opportunity zones in Mississippi, and we're going to work every one of them because it gives America a great opportunity to show not only the entrepreneurial spirit, but philanthropy. So that if you've done good in America, and a lot of you out there have, and we're proud of you, but you want to give back, so you want to go to people that need your help and give them a helping hand. And while at the same time you receive that tax credit. I don't know if I could have designed anything any better. So now we're trying to see what's next. And Treasury, again, has been so wonderful to be able to say, look, we're trying to open this and make it as broad as we possibly can for those of you that will take advantage of it. So we're enjoying every bit of it. We intend to keep pushing ahead. And those of you that want to be involved in the Mississippi Miracle, I'll be backstage as soon as we finish.
Well, I'm going to take you up on this point on what's next. Where do you see, in addition to the idea of you had a very lucky moment where you actually had a resident that had a gain and you had an opportunity there, but there is still essentially state and local leadership that needs to happen to get more of these things out there. What do you think is a good best practice for other governors that are out there? I think
one of the things that was said earlier, and I said at breakfast this morning, try to stay out of the way. Private enterprise does a really good job at building things, at developing. Now, there's some things that we have to regulate, so we want to take care of the environment. And we want to make sure, as we said earlier, we can modify some developers' behavior and get them to put really good workforce housing in these areas. But try to stay out of the way as much as you can, except for being a salesman. I tell people, as governor of Mississippi, I'm a salesman. I work on commission. So I have to be out here every day finding new opportunities for my state. And that's going to look like health care. I mean, if I can get people to invest in primary health care in rural Mississippi, I don't know about your hospitals, but my rural hospitals are having trouble staying open. The model has changed over the years, so telemedicine is important. We just opened up a new healthcare clinic in Morehead, Mississippi, where I was born, Sunflower County. You want to see another distressed area? So can we get you to invest in that healthcare center? And also, I've got the Delta Regional Authority that put funding into that healthcare center. And it's a privately held center, so it's working with the local hospital that's providing doctors and telemedicine for the patients in and around that small community. But I think infrastructure in cities, I don't know about you, but we've got cities that had water systems put in the 1930s and 1940s, and they're collapsing. How can we go about fixing that? How can we invest in infrastructure so that I can bring more companies to downtown Jackson that will have the needed water, electricity, services that they can provide, housing, again. So it's all of the above.
It's all of the above.
Yeah.
Richard, I'm going to come to you and as well, Manny. Richard, CIM Group has been doing for years community-based investing, working with various stakeholders. You've got one perspective with regards to let the private sector lead. You've got other perspectives out there. Share a little bit your knowledge and experience in working in these various parts of underserved communities across this nation.
We've been working in undercapitalized communities, trying to build real estate and infrastructure for about 25 years. So we come at it with a slightly different perspective than the legislative overlay. This is a wonderful thing. You're able to do good while doing well. And that's what we would all like to do. It's why we went into the business we're in. Mm-hmm. However, I don't like to throw cold water on a burning fire, but there needs to be a little bit of cold water thrown on it. We are big believers that this is a fantastic opportunity in a long line of federal, state, and local support for communities in positive transition, lower income communities, communities that have been undercapitalized for very, very long periods of time. But this is one, from a community investment point of view, this is one in a list of many. And the governor just mentioned that sometimes they have to layer one on top of the other. And there is great promise here, because this is one of the more flexible programs that's ever been put in place for investing in undercapitalized communities. There's no designation as to what you need to invest in. There is a high level of flexibility that allows the cost of capital to be bought down when you're investing in these submarkets. That being said, we've been investing for many years. We've got over $4 billion today invested in the markets that are within these zones, in our ordinary funds. Mm-hmm. And what that tells me is there are many good investments, because we weren't getting a bought down capital in these markets. But we have been utilizing all of the techniques available for investing in underserved markets, because at the end of the day, there are two things. This is a continuum, but there are two major things that are going to come out of this. Will the investments be productive for the investors who are trying to do philanthropic things while making money? These are impact-type investments, and they can be tremendously positive psychically for the investor. And if they do well financially for them, this will continue to get tremendous support. However, that requires good investments. The structure of this program, like many other programs, still requires that good investments be made. So I would be very cautious as you go into these to make sure that you don't do away with the discipline that existed when you invested in these markets before. It's now less expensive to do so. Your returns can be better. This will unquestionably push marginal transactions over the finish line that have been in the hopper for years. It'll expedite the good deals that have been in process.
So when you're talking about these bad investments, give us a sense of what you're thinking.
Well, if you throw money at a program into a community that doesn't want that particular type of development, most communities will ultimately organize against it. If you turn around and instead of supporting the demands and the needs of an existing community, you're going to be creating tremendous negative externalities associated with that community. You're going to do things that are contrary to what that community's own desires and goals are. So the last thing you want to do is potentially have a transaction that's dependent upon you finishing it in 24 months, take you 6 years or 8 years because the entire community is up in arms against you. So our policy has always been, whenever we're investing in these kinds of communities, is target things that will generate other activity in the community consistent with the community's desires. So you need to do a lot of homework. You need to spend years. Our program is we spend an average of 2 to 5 years in a given market before we'll actually put capital to work there. And most of that time is spent learning the desires and interests of the local community. It's not jamming through projects that seem good on their surface, but aren't really embedded in the community's desires. So one, you really want to do things that the community already wants to see done. And two, you want to maintain discipline in these investments, which requires that when you, and all of us will be in this business because this looks like an attractive kind of program, when you look at our responsibility as investors in Opportunity Zone funds, make sure you take a careful look that the group you're working with is focused on making sure that the community benefits, maybe not exclusively, but substantially from the investments you're making. A lot of groups who have not been working with communities for a long time don't really think about that. It's not that they're not interested in it, it's just not something they've lived with year in and year out. And secondly, you want to make sure that the discipline of investing remains, and you work with places like the governor described in Vicksburg, where they are looking for a particular advancement for their community, and we can use the opportunity zones to support it. And with those caveats, this could be a watershed event for investing in capital-starved communities.
You bring up a good point. Manny, I'm going to ask you to talk in a second, but before I do that, Brent, one thing. So in terms of communities with regards to what they actually want, there's this question mark between how the regulations in the early days was encouraging principally real estate only versus what they were looking for, jobs. And in the last round of regulations, there were some modifications there. Quick comment there before I come to...
Yeah, so one of the questions we had to address was how do we deal with the question of judging an operating company in an opportunity zone? If it's customers, if it's national or global in its customer base, how do we look at the qualification of that company for generating 50% of its income, of its gross income in the zone? And what we realized was we needed a lot of flexibility to make that work. So we put in place in the set of regs we put out last week a variety of measurement methods that can be used to determine whether you are operating, whether you're meeting those statutory criteria. And we're hopeful that those will incentivize not just real estate investment, but operating companies to
You heard it here. Operating company investments are in. Manny, you're a long-term investor across multiple asset classes. When you've, in your storied history, have been looking at different programs, as you're looking at this and the rules that are in front of you, what's your perspective?
So my perspective is that people in this room do not understand how gigantic this is. People at this conference don't understand how gigantic it is. I view this as I'm Jeremiah coming to Jerusalem trying to tell you the city's going to be destroyed. I'm here to tell you this is the biggest program that anyone has ever seen in their lifetime. I've been in the markets for 50 years. I've never, ever seen anything like this in my life. When the Undersecretary says it's going to be, quoting Senator Treasurer Mnuchin, it's $100 billion, it's already $100 billion. It'll be $1 trillion of equity, just equity to start with. That means it's $4 trillion if you just add the debt piece along with it. This is transformational. It's going to transform your lives. It's going to transform the lives on the people on this stage. It's going to transform America. Because when you move $1 trillion from one part of the country to another part of the country, it makes a massive difference. There are going to be losers. Rich areas, United States, are losers. Bethesda, Maryland is a loser. This is not a zero-sum game. There are winners and losers, but it is transformational that no one quite realizes. The second thing is, remember, this is not about real estate. People need to get it through their head. This is about jobs. This is about massive job creation in many, many parts of America through the business rules, which are much, much bigger, much, much more important than all the real estate pieces. The real estate pieces were just meant to be an infrastructure piece. This is all about business and jobs. There's already billions of dollars being committed everywhere in the United States. Google's out trying to hire 20,000 artificial intelligence engineers, tip of New York, opportunity zone. Walter Reed, Johnson & Johnson, just opening a laboratory for new drugs, opportunity zone. So this is going on as we speak. You're not even in the first inning. The warm-up pitches have just been thrown out. And so it's not late. It's very, very early. It is going to impact neighborhood after neighborhood, community after community, in a massive, massive scale. Of course there'll be pushback. We're building $500 million of projects right now. I just came from a county next to Savannah, Jasper County, where we're building 350 warehouses. Because Savannah is the #1 port, will be the #1 port in all of North America in another 4 years. No one's ever seen anything like it in their life. So Jasper County, though, the average income is $28,000. And now all of a sudden you're going to create 1,500 jobs in a county of 3,000. It's a mind-boggling impact. On top of that, we're taking a philanthropic wrapper and saying, fine, we'll put up $350 million, but we'll put up money that has nothing to do with our project. We're going to train welders. Because a welder makes $125,000 to start, makes $250,000 if they can work in an LNG plant. This is a county where people get up 4 o'clock in the morning to drive the overhead to work at hotels that we're all staying in, paying $1,000 a night room. They're doing piecework, paying $10, $20 to clean the room. And they have to then drive back to watch their children. It's a county where 95% of the people are on school lunch programs. This program is going to be able to transform county after county, city after city. Is there going to be pushback? Of course. If you live in Boulder, Colorado, you don't want opportunity zones. Your house is $1 million. The policeman has to commute to get there. So Boulder bans opportunity zones. So they say, no, you can't start for another year and a half. That's okay. They want to do that, fine. This is a very big country. 10% of all America is an opportunity zone. So every single company is going to move their expansion. Every single company is going to open their new piece in an opportunity zone. This is going to have a massive multiplier impact. $25 billion of venture capital is going directly to opportunity zone. They're not going anywhere else because the rules are so powerful. And that's every pharmaceutical company, opportunity zone. Every manufacturing company, opportunity zone. It'll happen everywhere. And again, it's about jobs, jobs, jobs. Once the jobs move to these areas, the real estate will be protected, will follow. That's avoiding what we call stranded real estate. But no one in this room, take my word for it, has ever seen anything like this that has the ability to narrow the huge amount of gap of income in the United States. But just think how big it is. This is the only country that has massive capital gains that's not tapped. So there's $6 trillion of just long-term capital gains. This covers short-term capital gains. That's another $50 billion. There's another $3 trillion created every year in capital gains. That's dead money. That's billion-dollar buildings just sitting there waiting for the next generation to inherit and get a stepped-up basis. That's Facebook stock at $1. They don't want to sell it until it either goes in their foundation or until they can pass it on to the next generation. It's going to be sold. You're talking about billions and billions and trillions of dollars of assets that are not creating jobs that are going to create real jobs. That's jobs in every single industry across the board. So I agree with a lot of things that Richard said, but please remember how gigantic this is. Are there going to be abuses? Of course. There's abuse in life every day. There's abuse every day. This is not a Trump program. This came from Obama. This came from Sean Parker. Someone's got to get it right at some point. You know, Polk wasn't a president in the Civil War. He was the president in the Mexican-American War. It's not that complicated. Sixth graders can understand it. So this is a progressive Democratic program, but a bipartisan program by Cory Booker and Senator Scott, but it really started 8 years ago and finally got enacted. And the undersecretary, the people at Treasury and Internal Revenue have done a brilliant, brilliant job making it as open as you want it to be. And so I would urge you to look at it because the tax benefits are mind-boggling. The government's going to make money on this because if you give a person a job, they've got health insurance. You give a person a job, they don't have to take food stamps. You give a person a job, it has a massive impact on the government. Most of the assets that are going to come out, the money for Opportunity Zone, the government would never see a penny of it because it's all capital gains that would be transformed for free to the next generation. So I'd urge you, despite the skepticism, to try to just look at the rules, how powerful, how big they are. Every PE firm is going to start moving their money here. And one thing you can say about America is capital markets are unbelievably efficient. And once people understand it, once it starts, there's going to be a tsunami effect. It's like knowing 1975, we all should have be buying real estate downtown New York. 1985, we should be buying real estate downtown Washington. And whether it's San Francisco or the government's telling you, look, this is where Amazon's going to be located. They're giving you a map. And if you just follow that map, it is going to be both profitable, but it's also going to be a game changer.
Manny, you bring up a good point.
Every foundation it's going to change every foundation, how they look at things. It's going to change every charitable organization, how they look at things. They just don't realize this tsunami is coming, and it's 1,000 miles away.
While you're reading about these regs, I think it's a worthwhile thing.
And I thought I was going to talk too much on this panel. I was worried about that.
I'm running for office.
Come on. I'm elected.
No, but he brings up a good point. While you're reviewing what's in these regs, I think it's also important to understand what's in these zones. So 8,700 zones across this nation. Within them, you've got roughly 25% that are in rural areas. You've got about 75% that are in urban. You've got roughly, I would say, 35 million residents. That's 11% of this country's citizens are living in opportunity zones. You've got 29 million businesses in these opportunity zones. If you want to find an opportunity, you have to understand what's in there. Richard, I'd love for you to comment a little bit. What are the deals that you're actually starting to see that are percolating? It's not just real estate. It's a whole range of different things.
The whole range of... It's actually simpler than reading the regulations, which are actually longer than the statute. Statute's 6 pages. You can read it, and if you follow the rules, it's a little hard. What the regulations did was they made it easier to operate, but we started looking at it very early on. It's pretty straightforward. It's a little harder to do it, but there are many, many opportunities in these zones. We're starting to see one of the things we've kicked off is an investment in, we had, I don't know how many pending investments, but we had about $1 billion pending where we had options to purchase a large program. It was, we didn't know it was in an opportunity zone at the time because the statute hadn't been passed. And it is a a utility scale solar program in California that we looked at, and we were investing in that based upon its economic vitality as an investment in California. The entire location of that program is an opportunity zone, which will allow us to, in all likelihood, expedite the development of that. And the state supported it not intentionally, but accidentally by converting the requirement for renewables and moving it way forward. So there was a convergence of events. So Manny's point that this could be a very large-scale watershed event is not something that we should poo-poo at all. I think it's possible.
Yeah.
I think the problem is almost every other program that had significant impact needed extensions. This one is going to sunset. It's got a limited time frame that it operates in. And so the opportunity that Manny talks to is one that unless we end up with an army of nanobots way ahead of their time to build all of this stuff, we only have basically about 5 years to make this transition. So you got to pull it back to practicality. You've got to pull it back to making it work in the near term, effectively producing the outcomes that both the communities and the investors expect, so that when it gets a fresh look, the opportunity Manny talks about, in fact, occurs, because there is that opportunity to make a large-scale transition and dramatically reduce the wealth disparities in the country by moving capital from wealthier areas to less wealthy areas, hopefully without destroying the wealthy areas. But that is a real possibility. It's not possible within the context of the period that we currently have in place.
What Richard is bringing up, I think, is a good point. Essentially, there are three benefits. A, if you realize the gain, you've got an automatic deferral that happens until 2026. Then a second benefit is if you've been invested either 5 years or 7 years by 2026, you get a reduction in your tax, a step up in basis. And the third, if you've been there for 10 years, you get a complete tax-free on the new gains. That calculus in terms of getting your 5 and 7 years in by 2026 requires investments to be made by the end of this year. So that's why you're hearing a lot of interest from various folks. And this point on extending the time frame is a conversation that many people are having, whether or not it's a legislative thing or a regulatory thing. But Manny, you said read the regs. I want to ask a question. What do you think is not in the regs? What didn't we get?
So whenever there's a rush to do things, there's going to be little glitches. And for this program to work, it cannot be a program for the rich or a loophole for the rich. It's got to be as broad as possible. And they're already democratizing. They're already telling you right now, you get your K-1 today, you can go and invest in Opportunity Zone until June and redo your 18 taxes. That's mind-boggling. So it has to be very, very democratized, where someone who has $1,000 can do it, $5,000, $50,000, $100. What's not in the regs, which the Undersecretary is going to solve for us using his wisdom, is that one of the issues were banks. Investing directly in a bank is not considered an Opportunity Zone investment. Banks are investing in Opportunity Zone. J.P. Morgan, PNC is going to put $8 billion in Opportunity Zone, but the bank investment itself is not. So we invest $1 billion a year in small community banks. Sub-debt, which counts as equity, and equity that both of those pieces can leverage 10 to 1. What was left out was community development financial institutions. These are the institutions that day and night have been working in these areas, the underserved areas of America, making the small loans that realistically we're not going to make, you're not going to make, they're going to make it. That's to the laundromat. That's to the restaurant. That's to some very small business. For some reason, they got left out. They got excluded. They got included with the evil people, J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, the evil banks. So they...
Except the ones in the room.
It's Manny's opinion there.
So they got left out, and they need somehow to be put back in through regulations. Because even though every single person in Congress agrees that these 500, 1,000 institutions that make $5 billion of loans a year into these areas should have been included, and the way Congress works, it's very hard to get things done. So if the regulations are just tweaked enough that allow CDFIs to be included as good businesses for operating zone purposes, many people will put $1 billion into them. We'll put $1 billion of sub-debt into them.
That's a good question for Brent right here.
That's a 10-to-1 multiplier. Every dollar you put into them as equity makes it go up 10-to-1. So Brett is going to adjust the regulations, hopefully, so that CDFIs are not excluded.
This is exactly the process that we have been engaged in for a year and a half and will continue to engage in. Questions like the one Manny has raised come to us. We look at the statute. We evaluate whether we have the authority to do it. We consult on whether it's good policy, and we come up with a result. I don't have a result on that one today, but that's the sort of thing where we've had dozens of these questions come across the transom, and our goal is always to look at them, evaluate whether we have the flexibility to do it and whether we think it's a good idea, and get a regulation out as quickly, or get guidance out as quickly as possible to implement that.
Yeah, this one is an interesting one because within the statute, in the regulations, as well as in the statutes, you have a rule that an eligible investment cannot have more than 5% of its assets in non-qualified financial assets. So no lending institution, no hedge fund can be an invested opportunity zone business. Yes, and Manny's correct. CDFIs, which is a Treasury-funded program, actually has a rule that it has to provide 60% of its lending and deposits into low-income communities. And so it's an interesting thing to think about CDFIs as an eligible business opportunity for receiving. But the questions of regs versus statutes, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, the statute is very flexible. It is not infinitely flexible. It imposes certain constraints on that, and we observe those.
Good. I think you said you actually had a good
did.
question.
I just wanted to say that every governor wants economic development in our state. We want to create jobs. We go out and tell everybody about that, and we're very proud of it. And so all opportunity zones are not created equal. For example, Continental Tire is building their largest plant in Continental's universe in North America right near Bolton, Mississippi, a little small rural area. I mean, literally, it was in the woods. We had to go down and take the trees, and it's 1.2 million square foot under roof, 2,500 employees. It's in an opportunity zone. Amazon's fulfillment center, their customer fulfillment center, is going to require 850 employees, and they're building it in Marshall County in an opportunity zone. So if I'm looking at opportunity zones and saying, I got Amazon up here, and there's nothing around, there's no restaurants, there's no hotels, infrastructure needs are all there, I may want to look at where Amazon's going and go there, or where Continental is building this bohemian plant out there, where it's massive number of people that are going to be working there. And again, they need everything that's growing around it. And to the point earlier about, a bad deal is bad politics. If we go and we speculate on a company and I invest $10, $20 million of Mississippi's money in it, and they close 5 years later, I'm in trouble. So we do the due diligence. We make sure. So if you go and look and say, I might want to invest in this company, but I'm not sure of it, if the state of Mississippi's looked into it and we're investing, you can bet we've seen their financials. We are a German bank. We know everything about it, how much money they have, and it's for 80, it's a 100-year investment. So you can take some comfort in knowing that we're looking at it. If Delta Regional Authority is investing money, they're looking at it. They're making sure that the books are in order, so that gives you some comfort. Those are just some things that you might want to weigh when you get ready to come to Mississippi and invest. $6 trillion, Manny said. I only need half of that. And we can change the world as we know it.
Now, you bring up this point on just knowing what's in there, and Richard, I'll ask you to comment on this. In the original statutes, the Invest in Opportunity Zone Act, a lot of people have opined that essentially 70% of it made it into the Tax Cut and Jobs Recovery Act. The 30% that didn't was largely on information gathering, reporting, metrics, and whatnot. I'd love to hear from your perspective. Is that something you want to be seeing?
Oh, it's critical.
Investors.
Again, we want, if you come into Mississippi, we've got someone bringing their capital gains, I want to give you a sense of certainty. I want you to know that we're not speculating. We don't invest in startups. We just don't do it. I mean, I get guys that come to me all the time and say, look, I've got a new idea on how to split the atom, and if you'll just give me $30 million, I'll build a plant. Look, that's a deal anyone's going to take. No, I'm not going to give you $30 million, but if we do invest, and other private investors, like when Continental came and they were going to put their $1.4 billion investment in it, they felt fairly comfortable. And I can tell you that my dear German friends are risk averse. The last thing they asked me was, we're worried about tornadoes. Can you do anything about that? Sure, I got an anti-tornado machine back here. I'm going to pull it out for you. True, but they're building it. And so, again, we want to make sure we've got a good project. We want to make sure that people are not investing their funds in a project that hasn't been reviewed, that we're not comfortable with. I feel like, and I tell people, if I want to invest my own personal money, that's a level that I'm looking at if I'm investing the taxpayers' money or your money in a project in Mississippi.
If I might add, one of the things we're soliciting comments on in our latest set of regulations is what data should we collect and who should collect it. Doesn't naturally fall within the IRS's ambit to collect non-tax data. So one of the questions is to get that data for measuring results and preventing fraud. So we're interested in people's thoughts on that question.
Look, I'm a former state auditor. I'd handle that for you.
For a couple of basis points on the
Richard
front.
said, the reason so many of the programs have failed in the past is because they had a very, very small and a very limited vision, but they also had the extreme heavy hand of government. And so it's important to have transparency. It's important to have data. But there comes a point where you need to have capital move and move freely. Otherwise, it becomes so much friction it doesn't work. For me to do $500 of new market tax credits was a great program, cost the government $700. That's the failure of it. That's why it's not used everywhere. So it's important that this program be allowed to just move capital. There are going to be abuses. People are going to build luxury, silly pieces in opportunity zones. And there are going to be mistakes. Having said that, when you're talking about a program that's trillions and trillions of dollars, including the debt, the effect is going to be monumental. If you live in Silicon Valley today, you should be selling your house because every startup is going to move to an opportunity zone, whether it's the new Uber, the new artificial intelligence, the new Slack, the new Pinterest. It doesn't make any difference. They're all going to move to an opportunity zone because the advantages are so mind-boggling across the board.
The
Richard,
point that
at this point in terms of data collection, and it's essentially a question of whether or not that's an enabler or inhibitor, I'd love to hear you.
I think there is no replacement for data. You want to collect as much data as you can. You want to use it to inform decisions going forward. But I think one of the things that I think we're confusing here is the enabling legislation and how it enhances the capital that moves into these communities. I'm pretty sure the tire business probably, if they're that far along, is not taking any benefit from the opportunity zone. There's no opportunity zone
but
benefit.
Around it.
Yes, I'm saying, so there are,
That
it's
tire
in an opportunity
investor,
zone.
That corporation has massive capital gains. And they say, well, look, I can put the money
But they're
here.
not using it in this plant. They're
No,
not using it.
but by putting that plan in opportunity zone, they don't pay capital gains on their investment. The same way PNC is not going to pay capital gains on BlackRock stock, $8 billion, if they'll invest in an opportunity zone.
But that's not the point that he's making. I think he's making a different point.
I think that what I'm suggesting, and it's this community that will be the initial policeman, because near term, we won't have data. The community of investors who have capital gain will be the initial policemen of the success and failure of this program. And they need to be cautious, may not be the right word. They need to be energetic in their review of what they're doing. Are they getting the semi-philanthropic benefit they're seeking? When they invest, because they have to invest through funds, that's the structure. Right. When they invest, are they getting the semi-philanthropic benefit? And are they achieving the capital being put to work in a way that returns their expected return? And the initial investment community will be the policeman of this program. And if we police it properly, this could be the kind of watershed program for reducing income inequality that we're all hoping it will be. Mm-hmm. If the initial policing of this is not done by the investment community, I believe this will be another failed program.
But Richard,
it'll have some successes, but another failed program.
Well, I mean, you don't have to invest in a fund. When you say fund, they don't have to invest through me. They don't have to invest through you. Amazon's investing through their own fund. Toyota's investing through their own fund. Anybody in this room can go and create their own fund and make their investment. That's just a sort of term. So every corporation in America that has capital gains is going to create their own fund and invest for their own account to basically, defer the capital gains and also not pay the capital gains. So everyone can create their own fund, so they are going to be their own policemen. Are you going to get mistakes? Of course. But remember, this applies to every single person in this room. This applies to every corporation in this room. This applies to every foreigner who has any capital gains in the United States. Any trust that pays capital gains. It goes for the painting on the walls. Get rid of those paintings on the walls and turn them into something productive that really makes a difference.
Garage sale time.
Collectibles have a 38% gain tax. So one thing, though, I do think Richard brings up a good point. If we believe this amount of capital moving into these communities is a good thing, it's not about making sure that it happens now and it's done well, but it's actually that it's repeated. And I guarantee that if we don't have information gathering that's a baseline, and what happened in the Delta, and we have the ability to look back on it, we won't be able to repeat it because we won't have any of that evidence. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's a critical thing that I appreciated Treasury actually putting explicitly within the regulations a request for information on how do we do this efficiently, such that it actually is a benefit but is not a hindrance, to Manny's point. So I'm going to take moderator's prerogative and actually say we're about to wrap up, and I'm going to ask for final comments. But in doing that, I want us to kind of ponder for a second. I want us to ponder for a second with regards to, on this side, why don't we start, what happens if we don't get this right? Final thoughts?
Well, I think we are going to get it right. So, but if we don't get it right, the reason we don't get it right is because we haven't paid sufficient attention to it at the state and local level, and you're seeing attention being paid to it. So that's why I think it will be done right. If it's not done right, it's a massive missed opportunity.
What happens if we don't get it right?
I think that it is a massive missed opportunity, but in addition, if we get it very wrong, we can disrupt the very communities we're trying to help in a way that is not positive for them. So I think this could be a watershed event, it could be a nothing burger, or it could be something negative if it disrupts communities and doesn't lift them up. So this has got a wide range. This is one of those things with a tremendous variability in terms of its outcome. I think that honestly, the federal government has done pretty much everything right on the program, but it is one that is going to be driven by how states and municipalities deal with it and how the investment community behaves itself within the context of these investments.
Yeah. Since it's the Milken Institute, we'd like to end with the glass half full. What happens if we get this right?
Yes, sir. Well, when we get it right, it's going to be monumental. It will take those communities like the Mississippi Delta, for example, where I was born, that we've put hundreds of millions of dollars in over the last 20 years. Most of it for studies. We had to go study again and then form another commission and find out. This will work if, as I tell people about government, you really have to be pure of heart. Now, I know that's not a joke. You really have to be pure of heart. So when you go into this, well, make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. Make sure the community is bought in. If your mayor and city council or board of commissioners or your governor's against it, don't do it. It will not work. This has to be a cooperative effort to be able to go in these communities and make them better. That's why we're tracking this data, so that we can say it works. And here's the data to prove that it works. So invest more, encourage you more. This is what we have longed for in distressed communities throughout America. And I can tell you, we are in Mississippi have our share of distressed communities, but we have our share of giving. We're the #1 state in America for people who give to charities and to their churches. So this can be done at a massive level, and you are all a part of it. I didn't think Manny was going to tell you how great it was, because I was going to keep that under a basket until we got all of ours. But it is that big, and we're just delighted to be a part of it.
Final word.
I mean, this is not a giving program. This is an investment program. We have broken cities all over the place in this country. You know, the mayor of Stockton, a brilliant African-American mayor, said, look, we have the highest crime rate. We have the highest unemployment rate. We have the highest foreclosure rate in California across the board. Bring on opportunity zones. What do you mean you don't want opportunity zones? We have nothing to lose. So this is the first time in the last 50 years, really since the Great Depression, the country really is making some effort to say, look, we're going to make productive investments. Remember, you just can't buy something. That doesn't do you any good. You've got to build something. You have to create something. You've got to create jobs. And so that is the gigantic difference here. And this does have the potential to work, and it does have the potential to change the country. And this is like any other movement that gets started. There'll be lots and lots and lots of followers, but once it starts, it's very, very hard to stop something like this.
Thank you for that. I think as part of the theme for this year's conference, Driving Shared Prosperity, I can't think of a better example that goes back to Mike Milken's original prosperity equation, where if you start with the individual, their health, their education, you add in property rights and rules of law, social capital, the things that make us better as a group than by ourselves. And then you add in minerals and land, essentially real assets, the things that make us productive. You take this entire thing and you inject financial technology, capital into it. This is how you drive shared prosperity. I mean, he wrote this construct more than a few decades ago, and it seems to be really interesting to see this coming to fruition within this piece of legislation. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you to our audience. I'd like to say thank you to the panelists that's on the stage with us. Enjoy the rest of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job.